Good afternoon. This meeting of the Task Force for reviewing the connectivity and technology needs of precision agriculture in the United States is called to order. I'd like to welcome you all to the third meeting of the third term of the Task Force. Welcome to the Task Force members joining us virtually. And we also welcome the members of the public who are watching online at fcc.gov/live. My name is Emily Kaditz, and I'm the designated federal officer for the Task Force. I'm joined by Thomas Hastings, our Deputy DFO. Let's proceed with the roll call. Dr. Michael Adeline, Chair, South Dakota State University.
Present.
Dr. Shrikala Bajwa, Vice Chair, Montana State University College of Agriculture and Montana Agricultural Experiment Station.
Present.
Ryan Krogh, Vice Chair, John Deere. Ryan Krogh. Okay. Dr. Timothy Bradford, Veda. Dr. Bradford. Julie Bichelle, Ethos Connected, representing Irrigation Association. Julie Bichelle. Stephen Hill, Satellite Broadcasting and Communications Association.
Present.
Andy Bader, Fifth Estate Growers.
Hello, present.
Joseph M. Carey.
Present.
Heather Hampton Nodal, Nodal Limited Farms.
Present.
Carolyn Price, Upstate New York Towns Association.
Present.
Brad Robeson, representing National Rural Electric Cooperative Association.
Present.
Joshua Seidemann, NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. Joshua Seidemann. Joyce Sterling, Iron Horse Vineyards.
Present.
Dan Watermeyer, Commissioner, Nebraska Public Service Commission.
Present.
And from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, ex officio member, Andy Berkey, Administrator, Rural Utilities Service, USDA. Andy Berkey. Andy Berkey. We do have a quorum, so with that, I'll hand it over to Task Force Chair, Dr. Michael Adeline, to start the meeting. Dr. Adeline?
Thanks, Emily. I appreciate it. So I just want to say to everyone at this point, we need a vigorous discussion. This is a chance for the task force to ask the group chairs any questions or concerns that they may have. If I can use an analogy, we're in the third quarter and this game is moving right along. So please take this opportunity to, if you have concerns or questions, to ask them. And I would also ask that, because this is all virtual, if we can raise our hand, if there is a question, it's going to be a little bit easier for either Emily or I to spot on the screen. So with that, first let me say, is there any questions from the group? Okay, seeing none. We'll start out with mapping and Joe Carey.
All right, thanks, Michael. Can somebody at FCC bring up the slide deck, or should I bring it up? Perfect. Thank you. So, Michael, I presume you don't want to say anything about the first 3 slides. So if we can skip down, it's incorrect, please correct me. We can skip down to this slide, the initial findings of the Mapping and Analyzing Connectivity Working Group. I am the chair. I'm grateful to be joined by so many outstanding people, especially my vice chair, Brad Robeson. Can we move on to the next slide, please? You will find that this deck has changed very, very little from what we presented in August. There have been a couple of very minor adjustments. But as Michael said, if anybody has things that they think need to be corrected or added, now is the time to tell us. So we've categorized our recommendations into 5 categories: the presentation of the map, the validation and verification of the map's accuracy, the public challenge process, sustainability of the map, and awareness and outreach regarding the map. As you all know, but maybe people online are unaware, when the task force was initially convened, the Broadband Data Act had not yet passed, and subsequent to the formation of the task force, Congress passed the Broadband Data Act. And what that really did, as far as this task force is concerned, is it got us to say, well, is the Broadband Data Act and the way it is being implemented, is that meeting the needs of precision agriculture? And so that's what you will see in these recommendations, is we really looked at the way the Broadband Data Act is being implemented at the FCC and said, is this meeting the needs for precision ag? Next slide, please. So the first and most obvious thing is, what does the current national broadband map show? So when the task force was originally convened, there was no national broadband map. Now we have a national broadband map. And so we're looking at it and saying, does the thing that is the national broadband map, does that meet the needs of precision agriculture? And we went through and read the FCC documents regarding what the processes are that produce it. So we've come up with a handful of recommendations for each of these categories. With respect to the presentation of the map, the first and most significant of the recommendations is that the map should reflect the performance consumers can typically expect, not just due to RF coverage, but also due to network loading. So the way the FCC currently makes a map is they say, well, let's assume, or that the FCC doesn't actually make the map. The carriers make the map and submit it to the FCC, but they do it to the FCC specifications. And the FCC specifies assume 50% load on every cell tower. That is one thing to notice about this set of recommendations, and I should be really transparent about it, is for this third and final term, we focused primarily on mobile mapping, because agriculture, precision ag, is primarily an in-field activity. And so, although the Broadband Data Act covers both fixed and mobile, our emphasis was on mobile. We didn't completely ignore fixed, but our emphasis is clearly here on mobile. So this is, and you'll see this in our recommendations, at least I tried to say, whether I was talking about the fixed map or the mobile map or both maps, or even the broadband serviceable location fabric, which is all the places where you may need coverage. So first recommendation, include the cell tower typical load when you're figuring out the map. Okay, we might be tempted to say, well, we don't need to do that. This is rural areas. The cell towers aren't going to be heavily loaded. We actually had some speaker tell us, and a credible speaker, that that some of the most heavily loaded base stations are in rural areas. All right, so second recommendation, the mobile map should include a clear legend explaining in terms an ordinary citizen can understand how the map is to be interpreted. And the reason that it's not just obvious is when we say an area is covered, what that means is, depending on the kind of service we're talking about, like for example, LTE service or fourth generation cellular service, that means 5 megabit per second download, 1 megabit per second upload with a 90% probability that it will consistently work. Well, that you might get a connection, but it won't achieve that threshold. You might sometimes get that connection and it's 50% and not 90%. So we're just saying, okay, that's a reasonable threshold. Tell us on the map that that's what it means so that an ordinary person can understand it. We're recommending that the satellite view be enabled when the mobile map is being viewed. The satellite view is possible with the current map. It is not obvious how to turn it on. We struggled with it, and it was only when an FCC staffer showed us how to turn it on that we were able to figure it out. So we're recommending that it be included by default. And the reason that satellite view is so important on the mobile map is because you don't have addresses to key in. And for precision agriculture especially, you're often looking at things like, where's the irrigation pivot? Where's that row of trees that I always look at? And that sort of stuff doesn't come through on a regular map. All right, next recommendation, mobile satellite services be added to the national broadband map. Notice the word mobile satellite services here. Currently, the national broadband map includes satellite services under fixed. There are emerging companies doing mobile satellite, which is actually satellite on the go. Our friends at John Deere have publicly announced that they're going to be partnering with one of the mobile satellite providers to put satellites on heavy equipment. We think it ought to be on the map. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be on exactly the same. How it gets presented, we're not saying anything about that, but it ought to be included. The USDA NAS should produce a map layer on their map that includes mobile coverage over agricultural land. The idea there is that we want to be able to say, where is their mobile coverage and what crops are being covered? So we can figure out which precision ag technologies and equipment can most benefit from network connectivity. And finally, the last recommendation with respect to the presentation is the FCC should produce a map separate from the national broadband map, indicating where devices operating under TV whitespace rules can be used. TV whitespace is still somewhat an emerging technology, and it's not yet a mass market technology. The national broadband map is really for more mass market technologies. But TV whitespace is operated under Part 15 of the FCC rules. As far as I know, it's the only one of the Part 15 technologies that is geographically restricted, and so there ought to be a map showing where that is. And we think that speaking personally, I guess, I think that having a map there might facilitate adoption of TV whitespace. All right, I need to pick up the pace. Next slide, please.
Hey, Joe, before you go on, Heather had a question. Go ahead, Heather.
I'm sorry, I didn't see.
That's okay. I put it in the chat basically just to clarify or verify that you are asking, or that the recommendation would explicitly require the mobile companies to provide maybe a range of scenarios of what that delivery, that expected performance would be under various loads, or
no. What we're saying is that the map should reflect what a consumer can currently expect. So the FCC and the FCC's policy today with respect to the national broadband map is they've established thresholds for 4G and 5G service, both in vehicle and standing still outdoors. They only specify outdoor scenarios, or in vehicle scenarios, but never in a building. Okay. And so the recommendation is, hey, if you've got a base station that's consistently overloaded, then that should be reflected in the map. Okay. That's really what we're getting at, is if you know that you've got a base station that's constantly overloaded, if there's always a traffic jam on the freeway, by analogy, then that should be reflected in the map. So
Okay.
we're not, now we can discuss whether we ought to have something like what you just said, where we have kind of a curve of what you could experience. Figuring out how you present that could be challenging.
Oh, yeah.
And one of
Definitely.
the things we really wrestled with was just how much information do we want to put in the map versus how much do we want to make the map easily accessible for people.
Right.
So it doesn't require an advanced degree in computer science to adjust it.
Exactly. I'm picturing a map that ultimately I could zoom in on and it would show me. I think they call it a bar, but it really looks like a dot on my phone. I think I'm supposed to get up to 5 bars, but I'm always at the lowest, like entry level. You haven't even entered the threshold of the house step yet. So, okay. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. Appreciate the question. All right. Regarding validation and verification of the map data, so the Broadband Data Act does require that the FCC establish a process for validation and verification of the map data and a public challenge process if you think the map is incorrect. So we've reviewed all that and really studied it in the context of precision agriculture, and the current method that's being used is largely crowdsourced, and we understand why they picked that method. So the FCC has issued an app that ordinary consumers can download and run on their phones to say, hey, I'm getting lousy coverage here, or I'm not getting what I expect here, is really what it is. And the problem is, well, there's a bunch of problems with that, but the fundamental problem in my view is crowds for crowdsourcing don't gather in rural areas. Okay. So you need to do something a little more proactive than waiting for people to complain. And so we're recommending that the FCC establish an independent on-the-ground sampling approach to verify mobile map accuracy. When the Broadband Data Act first passed, there was instruction in there that the FCC should do a trial with U.S. Postal Service vehicles. The FCC did that trial. We reviewed the report that they submitted to Congress on it. We think that that's directionally in kind of the right direction, but not that's going to need some more work, but something along those lines. FCC should use propagation models that are open source and widely peer reviewed. Currently, as I said before, the mobile network operators compute their coverage maps using mathematical models. They get to pick whatever mathematical model they believe in. They get to set whatever parameters they feel are appropriate, and they submit it to the FCC. And what the big three carriers are each using a different propagation model. So there's no standard here. Now, in the wireless industry, there are standards for propagation models, right? The NTIA ITS has models and develops new models and presents them at conferences, and they get peer reviewed by academia. We're just suggesting that at least for rural and agricultural use cases, open source models, we should pick one that we think is most representative, we should pick a set of standards for it, and everybody should use the same model. Okay. Finally, FCC and USDA should encourage and advocate for further research directed towards mobile mapping efforts over agricultural land. And really what this is, there is an active academic research community doing this kind of thing. We received a presentation from Notre Dame University in South Bend. They're doing some great research on this. I believe UCSB is doing some good research on this. So we just think that this is an area that can continue to evolve so that this first bullet point where we say independent on the ground sampling, obviously that's a fairly expensive proposition, but with improved models that use AI, that use more geospatial data, that have access to LiDAR data, we will need to do less ground truth and the cost will go down and we will continue to get good models. That's the third recommendation.
Hey, Joe, along that line, would you just mention why we even considered it? How are models created now? What is the premise behind the models now?
Well, it's fair. Okay, so there are a number of different models that get used. And like I say, it is an active research area in academia. How they're created is they're all empirically developed, right? So somebody goes out and they drive and they say, well, you know, if I think the model's going to look like free space path loss, but oh, look, the trees are blocking things and the rolling terrain is blocking things. And so I'm going to put in a fudge factor for each of these things. And oh, look, my body, when I hold the phone next to my head, that changes things. And I'm going to put in a fudge factor for holding the phone next to my head versus in my hand versus on my hip. All these things go into the models. And currently, somebody's typing and...
Sorry, that was me, because Joy just called me saying she lost connectivity, and I was putting...
So what we're suggesting is that things like, for example, tree foliage and tree type, evergreen trees absorb radio energy at different rate than deciduous trees. Deciduous trees have different radio characteristics versus when they're leafed out and when it's wintertime and all the leaves have fallen, that kind of stuff. The models don't completely capture that today, but it would be good to have that in models going forward. Most of the research, candidly, that is going on in the modeling community is focused on urban areas where there's a lot of multipath. Here, I'm saying, or the mapping group is saying, no, there's plenty of room for improvement in the rural areas as well, and especially taking advantage of new geospatial data sets that are available, like tree density and tree height, for example. All right, next slide, please, if there are no more questions. And how am I doing on time, Mike? Do I need to?
We need to take as much time if we have questions. So just keep moving along, but we still have to have a good discussion.
Yeah. This is Dan Watermeyer for a question.
Sure.
Now, just real quickly, I think to follow up on what Heather was asking, I'm curious about the mobile satellite map. And maybe I'm just listening in, I can't see it, but I got all the notes printed off. But can you expand on that just a little bit? Because that may be very key, but how do you map that? And I'll mute.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we haven't gotten into that in great detail, Dan. You might be tempted to say, well, there's every place is within satellite view. Now, the National Broadband Map is literally a broadband map, right? And so there is a kind of a broadband expectation to it. And the initial mobile direct-to-satellite connectivity is not broadband. It is more like text messages, or at least that's my understanding. So you'll be able to do text messages, perhaps voice calls, but not really broadband. Now, when you get into something more like the Starlink system that has big antennas, the Amazon Kuiper system, those sort of things, those actually are broadband at that point. And so that's probably what we're going to wind up discussing is, do we have a different broadband standard for satellite, just like we have a different what does broadband mean for 5G versus 4G? And you might be tempted to think, well, every place is covered. And that might be true, but it might not be true. It might be that in urban areas, the satellite service is not covered. What we were really trying to get at, though, with that recommendation is we should be agnostic to the technology. And I think this is a point that Shrikala was quite adamant about. And so I'll give her credit for that we don't really care whether it's 4G service or 5G service. We care that it's connectivity in a broadband sense.
Okay,
and
that's great.
why.
Thank you. That
Yeah.
answers my question, I think. So,
Okay. Okay.
Ethan, just real quick on the Starlink and Kuiper stuff, that will be coverage everywhere. So because think of that as a mesh system. So once they're fully deployed, it's not going to matter whether it's rural or urban. But that coverage will provide the same level of service everywhere. Once there is that fleet of satellites that are up, which is you're a few years out on that. But
you don't think we'll ever hit a capacity limitation?
They can keep adding satellites, so that's
Okay.
Theoretically yes, but the more satellites you add, the more capacity we gain. So
Okay.
they're talking up to 30 to 40,000 satellites, currently about 5. So
and so what you're pointing out there is that the map will continue to evolve.
And the map's going to be dynamic. It's literally going to it's going to happen every time there's a launch. There will be more capacity.
Right. Okay. Are we ready to move on to the challenge process? Hearing no objections, I'll move on. But thanks for all your questions, guys. I really do appreciate it. All right. So the working group regarding the challenge process, the FCC developed a challenge process that is suitable for sparsely populated agricultural and tribal lands. Crowdsourcing is not suitable. Okay, so we need to find a way that a person or a few people can challenge a map, challenge coverage on a map. When a challenge is submitted, the FCC should, one recommendation, one way to do that is, currently, when you submit a challenge using the FCC's map, speed test app, they're like, thank you, we got your name, we got your phone number, we got your email address. Thanks, appreciate it. And we're saying, no, you captured all that data about the user, so now tell them, if they want to, what the next steps are and when you're going to act on that challenge and update the map. So they basically filed a complaint by submitting that challenge. Now, there's this notion of cognizability in the challenge process. Does a challenge rise to the level where we can recognize it as being valid? And this is tied to there's a 90% chance that it will connect, which means when it's covered, which means there's a 10% chance that it won't cover. So even a failed test, it could be in a covered area. And what we're saying is, if a person submits a challenge, then the challenge should be responded to and say, okay, thanks, we got your challenge. If you want to, you could also go measure these other places. And then that would help us to make the challenge cognizable. Currently, the theoretical minimum number of challenges is 8 before a challenge rises to the level of cognizability, but really they want more like 20 measurements. And of the 8 measurements, 5 of them have to completely fail. So if 5 of 8 measurements fail, then they say, okay, yeah, I guess that's a challenge that we're going to take seriously. The FCC, so third recommendation, the FCC ensure that network operators do not inappropriately prioritize speed test traffic over ordinary network traffic. Some people have drawn an analogy to network neutrality here, but the point here is the mobile network operators, and in fact, this is a recommendation for all mapping. The network operator should not detect that a test is going on and then inappropriately prioritize that traffic over ordinary network traffic, thereby creating false positives. Next recommendation, FCC should collaborate with the mobile phone manufacturers to make low-level data such as RSRP, frequency, and cell ID available on the official speed test app. Now, currently, the reason we have this recommendation in here is currently you can get more data out of an Android phone than you can out of an iPhone. And so we're, at one level, what we're recommending here is that the FCC collaborate with Apple to make RSRP, frequency, and cell ID available. Now, obviously, they can only attempt it. They can't compel Apple to do that, but we're encouraging them to attempt it. Furthermore, you'll see in one of the upcoming slides that we're also making a recommendation. It shows up in the outreach section that they do a similar collaboration with the ag equipment vendors and their mobile network equipment. So this is possible on things like cellular modems that get deployed on tractors. There are some serious privacy concerns. We're not trying to minimize those, but you'll see that we're going to make a recommendation on that they collaborate with the ag equipment vendors as well. And maybe this is because I'm old, and most of the people in the working group are similar age. The FCC is standardized on the H3 hex system, which is becoming increasingly popular. We're asking that when they display for download pending and resolved mobile challenges, they include the center of the H3 ID as a latitude and longitude. So an H3 hex cell ID is a set of alphanumeric characters. I think they're hexadecimal characters, and it references an area. We're just saying, give us latitude and longitude on that. And the reason you need it is because you can turn on the map where challenges have happened, but you need to zoom in pretty far to see that. And if you don't have latitude and longitude, it's really tough. All right. Any questions on the challenge process? Okay. Hearing none, I'll move on. Next slide, please. Sustainability. Chairwoman Rosenworcel asked us to look into sustainability. We really felt like the broader sustainability issues could be handled better by other working groups than the mapping and analyzing connectivity working group. But there is this notion, as we were talking a moment ago, about that the map is going to be dynamic, it is going to be evolving, and so we need to keep the mapping process dynamic and evolving. So what that mostly comes down to is making sure that we properly allocated funding to ensure independent that we can continue to do these things that will keep the map up to date and fresh. I guess fresh, yeah, fresh is probably a reasonable word there. Independent on-the-ground testing to verify network performance, maintaining the FCC speed test app, adequate funding for NAS to perform finer granularity census and surveys, and funding further research to make the map more accurate and less labor intensive to maintain, especially over agricultural and tribal lands. So again, this point on the research funding, we're suggesting that research funding will, in the long run, lower the cost of maintaining the map. Any questions on this? Next slide, please. All right, awareness and outreach. To the extent that there is a crowdsourced element to the map, which I don't see that needs to disappear. It's just, it's insufficient by itself is the point we're making. It's important that there be awareness of it. Otherwise, you can't get people to download the app and submit feedback. The working group recommends that the FCC team with precision agriculture equipment makers that rely on cellular connectivity to collect the data that is necessary to improve maps while simultaneously respecting the privacy of end users. It's important, we understand that people don't want their data shared without them knowing about it, but give them the opportunity to share their data is really what we're suggesting here. And this is a new recommendation that wasn't in the August recommendations. Second recommendation, FCC must promote more widely the national broadband map in the challenge process, especially among agricultural communities. Third, USDA and land grant partners must educate the agricultural, rural, and tribal communities in awareness, broadband map and its application. USDA and land grant partners support these same communities to actively participate in the verification and challenge process. That's going to be, again, an educational kind of thing. And I believe that is our last slide. Can we go on forward and confirm that? Yes. All right. Any final questions?
Thanks, Joe. Anybody have questions? Raise their hand. Okay. Seeing none. Examining current and future connectivity and connectivity demand. Joy, are you ready?
I am ready. This is hilarious though. I just lost connectivity at my office, so I'm now on top of a hill using Wi-Fi, and so bear with me here. I won't be able to really see any questions, so if you can let me know. Let's go to our first slide. Next slide, please. This is a summary paragraph. I'm going to let you all read it for yourselves. I don't think there's any need for me to read it out loud, unless you need me to. Can you all see it? Is it too small, or do you want me to read it?
That's good, thanks.
Okay. What we're recommending here is a very strategic recommendation, and it's based on, to use a pun, a disconnect between what we perceive as reality and perception. The perception is that it is extremely, if not prohibitively expensive to bring fiber to the farm. But new GIS analysis at Penn State has found that 96% of all cropland in the United States is within 10 miles of existing fiber. And it feels as though that proximity gives us a window of opportunity that we should seize as quickly as is humanly possible. And one of our first recommendations is that FCC ask NTIA to please talk to the state broadband offices to prioritize precision agriculture in their final decision making of granting of BEAD funds in order to take advantage of this finding that suddenly there's the possibility that there are these strategic points where we can get a lot accomplished if it gets included in the thought process of building this mosaic of connectivity across the country. We also recommend, one of the differences of our report based on feedback from August is that we have changed the latency requirements. We've raised them to be under 10 seconds, as 10 milliseconds, I should say, as the latency requirements. What we had before was 0.5, and that's just impossibly low.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Okay. So we changed that to below 10 milliseconds, and we really based that on what the safety requirements are for stopping an autonomous vehicle. So that was our main thinking on that. Can we go to the next slide? We're very excited about the 5G, the rural 5G program. It's relatively new information that the FCC is going to move forward with that. It's a $9 billion fund with $1 billion specifically set aside for agriculture. And I think one of the key things that we want to emphasize is in our bandwidth recommendations of 100 symmetrical is in order to get the full potential of precision agriculture. Do I have another slide? The 100 over 100, our research has shown us that that is the sweet spot for getting the full potential of precision agriculture. The farm can function. We can use a lot of core operations at lower bandwidth, but in order to get to the cloud, we need that 100 over 100 in order to unleash all of the potential that precision agriculture affords, so that we can do the incredible work that we're asking our farmers to do in the face of climate change and feeding the planet. And next slide, please. Spectrum is just a giant area of consideration. There is, in August, we talked about the possibility of issuing a notice of inquiry on the allocation of use of low band spectrum. for IoT for precision agriculture, come to find out that that is in process. That was issued in 2021. And now what we're asking is that someone remember that that's in process and go back to investigating that possibility. One of the biggest problems that we've noticed is a lack or much unused spectrum in rural areas, and what we believe is that that is because much of the necessary build out has never occurred. So on the one hand, it would be extremely helpful to know where spectrum infrastructure has been built out, where it is not, so we have a clear picture. But from a policy standpoint, to either mandate or incentivize the build out of that infrastructure so that the spectrum becomes available. As we've discussed in the past, as a working group, we propose consideration of a dedicated ag band. That's a controversial concept because companies have already started working using different spectrum for their equipment, but there's no reason why it has to be an either or. That with AI driven spectrum sharing, we should be able to go back and forth. And basically,
Is it just me or did we lose Joy?
No, I can't hear Joy either.
I guess her Wi-Fi at the top of the hill kind of ran out.
She's stuck to the side, a couple feet.
Mike, do you want to give her a minute to try and come back? But if not, Heather, are you okay to go?
I'm totally ready. I got 9 minutes. I can do this.
All right. Well, Mike, if she's ready to go, I'm okay if Heather goes. What do you think?
Yeah,
Is there
no, I think
is there a vice chair in the group? Joyce group's vice chair who can continue the presentation?
Is that Stevens?
No, her vice chairs aren't present.
Okay. And let's go with the Heather.
All right. Okay, so moving into the accelerating deployment. If I understood our assignment correctly, it was let's highlight changes since August. So we did lead. Our next slide will show the segments within our recommendations. You can see license build-out obligations, funding and incentives, siting, informational resources, leveraging spectrum, and underused infrastructure. Next slide. In license build-out things, we don't have any obvious changes, but we do have some recommendations related to underused infrastructure that could potentially intersect with this section of the report. For example, looking at RTK towers, where they would have adequate structural stability and power and positioning within a carrier's network as an opportunity. And I think Joy's one of her last comments there related to knowing where spectrum is at play and where it's available totally relates to our spectrum recommendations toward the end here, not in this particular section. Next slide. Where we've spent a lot of our time since August is looking at funding and incentives. So we really had some creative discussion, I think. A few of one in particular, working group members started looking at other economic development programs and saying, hey, what if? Because the types of things we're suggesting here, like the investment tax credit, allowing, municipal bonds, opportunity zones, tools such as tax incremental financing. These are things that have not traditionally been used in unincorporated areas, i.e. agricultural lands, and most rural areas outside of municipal boundaries. Sometimes you have like an enterprise zone effect within a county, and that has its own governance guided by state laws, but really tried to bring some creative thinking to how can we incentivize private investment, not just keep asking the federal government for more money, but we are also looking at how can we wisely allocate those resources that have been set aside. So existing federal programs, and then states also have their own matching programs. You see the 5G fund, we still collectively support part of that being used for precision ag. And we're going to be updating our language in light of FCC's recently published notice. We want to be as current as possible. So we want to emphasize the need to plan for 6G and beyond, or 6G-like service and beyond, so that we can be scalable and keep up with evolving applications in precision ag. This allowing funding from multiple sources piece of our group, at this point, we've compromised on this point by agreeing that there are regional unserved and underserved areas where we have maybe a local player who wants to get in the game. I think there's concerns by some members of our working group, which are legitimate, that federal funding in particular does not create a monopoly. So, really prop up one provider in particular for any given situation. And what we are saying is that oftentimes rural and agricultural areas, they don't have that business case that might be attractive to a national or international carrier, but it is enough of an ROI for a regional or local provider to meet. And in those cases, it makes sense to allow for multiple funding sources. So we're still working through trying to bring clarity to that point. But I think for those of us who come from a rural area, this has got to stay in the final recommendation in some form. So I mentioned, municipal bonds. How about we look at cooperatively owned, co-ops in particular, being eligible for some of these bonding capabilities? That's really outside the box and gets into areas of bond cap and some issues with Treasury. This isn't just your typical FCC or USDA or even NTIA program. But again, it's the idea of how can we incentivize more investment, private investment, and money flowing into these areas for this critical purpose. We're going to go ahead and skip or move to the next slide, please.
Hey, yeah. Heather, before you go on, if you would back up that one. So you're really emphasizing 5G and the new generation. I've heard talk with the 6G, but you don't mention satellite. Are you?
No, we do.
Okay.
We do early on. I told you I'm just focused on what we've changed since August.
Sure.
In our preamble, we talk about an ecosystem of technologies and the need for all of the above, and then we also talk about the direct-to-device as a specific comment.
Okay.
So yeah, absolutely.
So for clarification, do you anticipate that the 5G, 6G will be the backbone of connectivity in across agricultural lands, and then there will be other pieces that fit in where that's not possible?
No, I think if we think of this like an anatomy, if you want to go with the metaphor of physiology, okay, a backbone.
Okay.
I would think that the majority of our working group still recognizes fiber as the backbone because you think of it like a neural network, right? And so that fiber is absolutely a prerequisite for any backhaul that we'd need for any wireless fixed, terrestrial or even satellite whenever we start looking at pulling the ecosystem together and bringing that down to the palm of the hand. So no, I mean, satellite, it's not viewed as the backbone, but it is viewed as a key component for getting it into that palm of the hand ultimately where we can continually make decisions. But I think fiber is still viewed as a backbone because I just read another article today about how AI will be driven not just by data centers, but ultimately dark fiber. And that makes sense, right? Because of the amount of kind of real time up and down and back and forth that you need for that type of tool.
So you're talking about fiber though to the home location. You're not talking fiber to every field, are you?
No,
Okay.
we're not. But we are
Okay.
saying it makes sense to have fiber to anywhere we would need to deploy more towers. We recognize that even with satellite,
Okay.
there's a need for more towers. And Joe did an excellent job, highlighting that many rural towers are overloaded already. And so how do we get more infrastructure in place using some of these public funds so that we can kind of reduce, increase speed to market, reduce the argument related to low ROI from carriers.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, next slide. In terms of siting recommendations, we haven't made any substantive changes from what we discussed in August and shared with the task force. Next slide. As far as informational resources, we haven't made any substantive changes on that either. We will have an introductory paragraph, and that's part of our work here in September. We'll go ahead to the next slide, but as a working group, our members are creating kind of expository or explanatory paragraphs to tee up each section, put it in context, why it matters, and some of the what behind it, and maybe even some of the how. And I do see us, though, as far as going forward, I know I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but as we have two areas, the sub 1 gigahertz that we still intend to discuss, and also Universal Service Fund. And the notion that here is an opportunity, because it seems, given recent court decisions, Congress has a working group, something's going to happen. So we may as well try to weigh in on behalf of precision agriculture and the unserved and underserved areas to say, here are some things that would make sense with the Universal Service Fund to help meet this need. So we anticipate discussing that and bringing that to bear in what you'll see, by the end of October. But I don't have anything to share today. The last section in our report, as it stands right now, is the leveraging spectrum and underused infrastructure. We've expanded that section to include the underused infrastructure, so it's not just spectrum, and have explored this notion of how can we incentivize build out of cellular base stations. So where it is like RTK, real-time kinematic towers, first, taking an inventory, what's out there, mapping it basically, but then also assessing, what are the specs on those? It's not just they're there, but what are they? And then potentially marketing that inventory to carriers or to providers. So that's an opportunity, we think, in our unserved and underserved areas. And there may be other assets as well. The RTK was something that had come up in the conversation, and everybody's like, you know what? This kind of makes sense. Facilitating emergence of sustainable competition. So here's kind of our comment to sustainability is let's avoid creating more monopolies and give thought to making wise decisions and policy making that would allow entry into the marketplace over time. We don't have all the answers on that, but we do agree philosophically on this point. We did have a question come back to us after August related to our language on unlicensed and licensed by rural spectrum. We think we've clarified that, but I'll be running that by a few of the FCC staffers in particular, just to say, hey, does this help, or do we need to do more in that area? Then also that accelerating development of direct-to-device. We had it in there in our August sharing, but we've added a sentence kind of acknowledging that the potential of satellite direct-to-device in your hand, your vehicle, wherever you are, has so much potential for consumers and businesses and agriculture. So I think that summarizes it. We can see what the next slide is, but I think, yeah, I shared already our anticipated work here in September and October, and really it comes down to providing more context for our recommendations for a final report, and then also exploring at least these two additional topics, the sub 1 gigahertz, which had some, I know that in the last round, our connectivity needs working group looked at that a little bit as well, but we think we may spend a little bit of time on that, and then also Universal Service Fund. So any questions for me before I go mobile? I will be joining by phone, but I absolutely have to go mobile. This time of day is really challenging for me. So, and this time.
Okay. Great job, Heather. Any other questions for Heather at this point? Okay.
All right, and you all know how to reach me. So, but I am going to try to log on by phone, and I'll shut down my computer. So thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Okay.
So we haven't had a chance to get Joy back up yet.
No, I see that she's on the call, but she's muted.
Okay.
Joy, are you back?
Yes. What a mess. Do we need rural broadband or what?
Joy, would you rather just go through your presentation or go after adoption and jobs?
However you all want to do it is fine with me.
Okay, Mike, up to you.
Let's do adoption, and then we'll give Joy the last word, Joy.
Maybe. You might lose me again.
Okay, Alex, are you ready to go?
Yes, thanks. Yep, for everybody's awareness, Alex Thomason, I'm the co-chair of this working group. Josh Seidemann couldn't be here today, so I'm standing in for him. And my understanding, I think similar to what Heather said just a moment ago, is this is basically developments from last month, and most of the statements are simply that, statements, as opposed to recommendations, and we're still working as a working group to write up our recommendations, and we'll have those, I think, at the next meeting. But next slide, please. And forgive me, I think most of what I'm going to do is just kind of read through the bullets and just stop and briefly and wait for questions if anybody has any. There was a comment, I think, that came up at the last meeting about per acre incentives, and so wanted to address that. There are barriers to adoption that remain for small farmers who face difficulties achieving return on investment on ag technology. Task force leadership asked at the last meeting whether per acre incentives could be implemented, and the work group members consulted with state ag departments and university extension services. And return on investment for small farmers will be difficult. Cultivating enthusiasm and strong dealer support for small farmers may play a positive role to assist adoption. And I'll stop just a moment for questions. If not, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, next, please. Regarding partnerships, extension services working with farmers can develop economic evidence to support championship or championing and advocacy for ag technology. Additional work on digital literacy, skills, and adoption can help portray ag technology as necessary and as a natural component in the current digital economy. And technical colleges can play a key role partnering with high schools related to ag technology. So I'll stop there. Does anyone have questions? Okay, if not, next slide, please. Regarding education, in the post-secondary world, hardware demonstration classes can be difficult from both the timing perspective with respect to whether someone is planting or harvesting, and that conflicts with classes or breaks. Weather and travel to farm sites can also be a factor, suggesting the use of small equipment that can be located closer to school as representative examples for exhibitions. Podcasts and similar instructional tools are useful, but they don't substitute for, if you will, kicking the tires, hands-on instruction. Future Farmers of America features ag technology-focused programming whose partnership with high schools can be promoted. Land-grant universities, mostly through their extension systems, are leading youth programs related to drones, and an example of that is at Purdue. And also in robots, and an example of that is here where I am at Mississippi State University. Any questions on that? If not, next slide, please. For the future technology. In some communities, a focus on sustainability and carbon footprint reduction will be an important sell. Artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics can assist farmers to harvest at peak ripeness, peak maturity, selecting mature fruit from others. Camera-based systems can increase yield at the farm and reduce food waste in transit warehouses and production/retail facilities. Core technology exists and products based on it are being developed. And automation may allow multiple passes through the same area for selective harvesting. And a good example of this would be cotton harvesting. And I'll stop for questions in case anybody has them. If not, we'll move along. And I think that's all I have. So I'm happy to answer questions or discuss.
Questions for Alex? I don't see Alex, but I have a question. Did you discuss in your group regarding security concerns and educational opportunities around that type of topic?
You're thinking about cybersecurity?
Yes, for farmers and ranchers.
Michael, we have touched on it. I'm struggling to remember what the details of the discussion were. It is something that's been touched on. It is something that is a significant concern. From a researcher standpoint, that's obviously something we're very concerned about in terms of the development of precision ag technologies and autonomous systems and that kind of thing. Yeah, I can take that back for action for further discussion.
Okay, appreciate it. Any other questions for Alex? Okay, seeing none. Joy, you're up.
Well, heck, do you want, should we start over, or what do you think? What's the best way? Was this just a complete jumble, or did everybody have a chance to read through and we can just move to sort of general discussion? Or do you want me to start from the beginning?
Joy, I thought everything was good up until your last 3 slides. Like I was able to pull from your points for our accelerating deployment needs.
Okay, so take me to where you want to go. It's a good thing my middle name is Flexibility. Okay, so first of all, let me say that I'm a little bit concerned that we are working more on a manifesto than we are a white paper. If we wanted to reduce it to the absolute minimum, it would be last acre. That's really what we're after, is getting connectivity that provides an umbrella-like ecosystem around the entire farm or livestock operation. For last mile, we are very bullish on fiber to the farm. And we're just completely thrilled with this new GIS analysis that we have points on the maps that we can look at to factor in where exactly to target the fiber. Just if you look at the 96% of all crops that last 10 miles, we're trying to get a fix on what that would cost generally, but my sense is that it's rather minimal, and that we should then look beyond to the 99.9% that are within 25 miles. It just seems as though there is a strategic opportunity here that our working group highly, highly recommends that we pursue. And then in the last acre wireless coverage, we're looking at this using all the tools in the toolbox. And so our sense in that regard is that tech neutrality is not that they're interchangeable, but that you need all the tools in the toolbox. Heather touched on one of the issues regarding satellites. It's very interesting that low Earth orbit satellites really are the shiny new bright object in the equations. And what's happening is that there seems to be that as at least one of the providers has achieved critical mass in terms of the satellites that are in orbit, that they can meet at least the bead requirements of 100/25 to provide connectivity. One of the problems that we have with that is, oh, and I wanted to add that also the FCC is considering giving spectrum for satellites, which would help boost that throughput. But one of the problems which Heather alluded to is that there's really only one provider that has reached that critical mass. And so that raises, in terms of sustainability, a question, because so much a part of what we would consider sustainable connectivity is a competitive marketplace. Next slide. We advocate for mid-band spectrum through AI-driven spectrum sharing. The common wisdom is that mid-band is the most suitable for 5G, which is our preferred model for last acre connectivity. The people at the IoT for Ag group, which is funded by the National Science Foundation, they recommend low band spectrum specifically for IoT. And the FCC did issue an NOI in 2021, and we are hoping that the FCC will revisit that and move forward. Again, it's never going to be a one solution fits all situation. So on every single level that we've been investigating, there is no silver bullet. It's finding the right combination and permutation of technology to fit any particular farm. Going forward, we recommend that a dedicated percentage of spectrum be allocated specifically for agriculture if and when the FCC regains its auction authority from Congress. And we also urge that license holders be either mandated or incentivized to build out the currently unused spectrum in agricultural areas. It's very frustrating that we have unused resources, and part of it, of the unused spectrum, seems to be because the infrastructure was never built out. We also, as a group, feel positive about a dedicated ag band, which would reflect the the significance of agriculture as a national security issue, and what we're asking farmers to do in terms of climate change and feeding the planet. We recognize that a dedicated ag band is controversial because certain companies have already have worked with different spectrum, and therefore this would require a change. But there's a way around that, which is that, again, it's not mutually exclusive. You can go back and forth between the two. So yet again, this is not one or the other, but all of the above. Next slide, please. On sustainability, there are 3 sides to this story. Number 1 is sustainable connectivity. The essence is that we have ubiquitous, perfectly seamless, always on, and redundancy is an essential part of what we need to have sustainable connectivity. Connectivity for sustainability is what precision agriculture is all about. And again, one of our key focus areas is to make the distinction that we can do a lot of really good work. We farmers can do a lot of really good work at lower bandwidth, but in order to get the full transformative power of precision agriculture, we need that higher bandwidth, and we're recommending, I'd love to repeat, 100 over 100. Sustainability, one of the key factors is traceability, and the FDA has a traceability rule that goes into effect in January 2026. The FDA does not have any requirements about how that information needs to be provided. Technically, you could just have a hand-drawn map of your farm and fax it to the FDA, but the key here is that traceability is so important that we can, number 1, in terms of investigation, if everything is operating at the highest level of reporting, we can reduce the time it takes to investigate any kind of outbreak. But more importantly, the hope would be that with heightened connectivity, the farmer will be able to see and stop any problem before it spreads. And this becomes important in terms of, say, an E. coli outbreak in a livestock operation. It's essential when you particularly consider the current issue of avian flu being transmitted to cattle. So there's so much that is really important that for safety reasons, we need to have the higher full capacity for connectivity. Next slide, please. We modified this wonderful slide, which is my absolute favorite thing, in order to show, it's not quite perfect, but it will get better, but to show the sweet spot, which is in the upper right quadrant. And again, you can see down in the lower left that the core farming practices can take place at lower bandwidth, although we want to emphasize that it requires some connectivity. You can't have nothing. But again, that the full Monty is up there in the upper right quadrant. One thing that's remarkable about this slide is how few little dots there are. And that is an indication of how little we have going on in the country. Most of these dots are based on what's happening at the ARA Living Labs. We have really a complete lack of information about projects that are going on. And so one of our recommendations is to We got to get out there and have demonstration farms using specific farming tools so that we know exactly what the bandwidth requirements are for any individual operation. Next slide. Or is that it? That's it. Any questions?
Questions for Joy? Heather.
Thank you. Joy, love this revelation on proximity of dark fiber to the majority, I mean, super majority plus ag lands. Does your team, and I open this up to anybody on the task force, have any ideas of any policies that are either being considered or should be considered to make that fiber accessible, get it active?
I'm sorry, the maps show a gap between existing fiber and the cropland. So there's no fiber in that 10-mile area. So what we're looking for is deployment. And our recommendation is that this information be given to the states so that they can factor that information into their decision-making process of distributing the funds, the BEAD funds.
Yes, but I understood you to say that part of the fiber that was within the 10 miles was dark fiber, so it wasn't lit. So I guess what's on my mind is how do we make sure that that's lit, so to speak?
That's not my understanding. My understanding is there's a gap.
Okay.
Joe.
Thanks, Joy. Great presentation. I have one comment and one question. Maybe they're both questions. So I haven't looked at this in 25 years, but 25 years ago in Canada, the regulations were slightly different than they are in the United States. And the Canadians would allow in rural areas higher power transmission on unlicensed devices than was allowed in urban areas. And that's a kind of a tricky thing to enforce because, obviously people can buy things for rural areas and use them in urban areas, which would cause problems. But have you thought about maybe something like that, or was all your thinking on public networks?
We have thought about it, and it does need to be included, and it is problematic. It's not, it has pros and cons like everything else.
Right.
However, there are a gazillion ancillary solutions.
Okay.
And again, we advocate for all of the above because in each case, it's going to be different as to what's going to work. But yeah, just like antenna height is also another consideration. There are so many factors that can be at play that can boost the connectivity to get where we need it to be. Yeah. So yes.
And then the second question, more directly related to our work on the mapping group, is you're advocating for 100 by 100, which I presume, maybe I shouldn't presume at all. The question I had was, should we have the national broadband map include a higher data rate? So currently, the national broadband map for fixed service does not include a data rate at all. It just says this is what's advertised. And then for mobile service, it says this is what we actually do. And for LTE, it's 5 megabits down and 1 megabit up. It's always asymmetrical because, and there's a a reason based in physics that it's always asymmetrical. And then for 5G service, it's either 7 megabits down and 1 megabit up, or it's 35 megabits down and 3 megabits up. So you have two levels. And I guess what my question is, and we can take it back to the mapping group for discussion, but I guess what I'm asking you is, do you think that we should have a higher tier map showing something on the order of 100 megabits on the map?
Well, why not, I guess, but particularly if that's, what we're advocating is that become the standard.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it kind of makes, as a cohesive task force.
I'm sorry?
Well, I'm just thinking that from a cohesive task force set of recommendations as opposed to independent working groups, it might make more sense if we included that. And
I think it would be great for the sake,
Okay.
First of all, I would appreciate the buy-in.
Well, you guys have done the work. One of the things that I'm struggling with, frankly, is my experience with the autonomy guys I've talked with has been that they need more data upload than they need download. They're actually more worried about pushing data up to the cloud than they are worried about pulling data down from the cloud. So they're pushing it up to these giant AI machines that are doing a lot of analysis, and then they're pulling down the digested data. So uplink traffic is going to become increasingly important, probably, for precision ag.
Well, one of the beauties, if we can go back to filling that gap, the last mile gap with fiber, then that gives us the future looking ability to raise upload speeds. That's another reason why fiber to the farm is so important as opposed to the other possibilities. And the beauty of this revelation of proximity is that it now suddenly seems feasible for us to get a large part of our working lands to have a fiber junction at the farm premises. And that is what allows for the growth of upload speed. And it also becomes the launching point for the wireless connectivity across the actual farm or livestock operation.
Yeah, I've thought that for a long time, but then aren't you really talking more about private networks at that point as opposed to public networks?
No, sir, because I think
Okay.
what we need in terms of this is we need government funding. So I'm not ruling out private networks. I think it's a combination. But what we want are a combination of private public networks, but we need government funding. There's very little chance that individual farmers will be able to build that network themselves. And then beyond that, in terms of funding, it's not just the infrastructure. There also will be the need for maintaining the networks. And I say networks plural because, as I mentioned, the IoT for Ag group says that it's very likely that most farms will require several networks to cover the working lands.
Thank you.
Any other questions
On
for
that,
Joy?
Hey, Joy, this
that
is
just made
Dan.
me think of a follow-up.
Dan, do you want to hold on? I think Heather's got a question. Heather, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Dan. Just on that vein of think about multiple networks across farms. And we've talked about this before, but I think we can never repeat ourselves too much. The fact that someone's farm is not just immediately around their headquarters, right? It could be stretched over miles, counties, even states, depending on where people are and what they're growing. So do we have somewhere in our recommendations or some working group that is identifying that ability to work across carriers, like I don't want to say roaming, we've talked about that before in the connectivity needs, but just being able to seamlessly go from one provider to the other and not have to worry about it, not have to stop everything just because now we have to figure out whatever new passcodes and multi-factor authentication and devices or whatever else could take place to be able to function in a particular network. Are we addressing this somewhere?
Well, I agree with you that we need to. And I'll make sure, I mean, I guess I'll certainly make sure that we include it in our work. Not that I have any brilliant ideas about how to effectuate that kind of cooperation. But it's interesting because I'm reading a huge amount, this is not on the wireless side, but a huge amount of interest is growing in terms of open access on fiber. Anyway, yes, Heather, that deserves much thought and to be included.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just feeling super stressed out right now with just everything that we have to do all the time just to get back online with whatever product or tool that we have to be dealing with. It's so frustrating.
Tell me about it. I just drove all over Tarnation to make a presentation. So honestly, I get it. Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Joy, I think I asked you this in DC about your Revelation thing, where you got 95% of the ag land is within 10 miles of the fiber. And then you had mentioned earlier with another question that there was this gap. Can you just explain what you mean by the gap? Is that the gap between the 5% that's missing it, that's not within the 10%, or the gap that's even there inside the 95 because not all of that fiber is accessible? What were you meaning by that gap?
The gap is between wherever the endpoint is of the existing fiber and then 10 miles to the farm.
Okay.
That's what I'm calling the gap.
Okay. I think maybe there's still a gap in that 95%, that a lot of that is not accessible. And I'm sorry about the beeping because I'm running a combine with GPS equipment. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it may not be, but I think we ought to look at it.
Okay.
In other words, I wouldn't want to make that. I wouldn't want to make that call without looking at it. And what I'm suggesting is that we go to the individual states and have them see whether that 10 miles in their individual states fits in as a piece of the puzzle of what they're trying to do.
Okay, I appreciate that explanation. So thank you.
I don't feel like I'm answering your question, but
hey, Heather, so let me see if, so what you're saying is wherever that fiber ends, and assuming it's 10 miles from the farmstead, you want the states to see if BEAD money could close the gap between wherever that fiber is terminated and the farmstead, and maybe also offer it as tower fiber if it would work out in the scenario.
Yes, that's a very good explanation. It could be, let me also say that my sense, and I don't know anything, they don't consult me, my sense is that Starlink is trying to get in on that business also.
Okay.
So first and foremost is fill the gap. The gold standard is fiber. My concern is that if we go with satellite to fill that gap, we will not achieve the 100 over 100.
Okay. Any other questions for Heather, or excuse me, for Joy?
It's easy to confuse us.
I noticed there's some thoughts there that cross over when it comes
Except
to fiber.
Heather is smarter than me, so.
I wouldn't say that. All right, any other questions? Okay, I don't see any at this point.
Can I ask Andy, who's on the call, if he feels I forgot anything here? Only because
Sure.
I've been so discombobulated moving around.
No, I don't think you forgot anything at all. I think that the notion, the discussion that you guys just had about the fiber was very interesting to me. And I think actually it would be something for us to talk about further. There's probably fiber within 10 miles, but whether it can be turned on at that 10-mile point and is accessible to the farmer, I think is an interesting question that we might want to dig into a little bit. And just a little bit of color on the fiber situation. You know, we're aware that there are other countries in the world that have a much higher penetration of fiber to rural areas than we do in the United States. And so when you hear some of us very excited about getting more fiber, just know that we're a little competitively behind compared to other places in the nation on fiber to rural areas. And so we've got some things to figure out, but we think it's critical to make that happen in order to facilitate things like edge compute and private networks and all the things that farms of all sizes can do.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, any further thoughts, Joy?
No, except that I just read that China is probably the leader in fiber deployment in the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if there are no further questions, we're going to move into the open discussion. And so any thoughts from the task force members related to anything, open discussion? I have some, but I want to give everybody else a chance first. Andy.
So I had a question that is actually synergy between two of our working groups, potentially. And this could be a topic for recommendation for future task forces or future other people. And when I was listening to the mapping discussion, I was thinking to myself that we have this concern expressed by the Internet of Things community that they may soon face spectrum limitations. And in particular, that lower band spectrum may be most beneficial for agricultural products that are buried in the soil or that are in forests or things like that. And so as I was listening to the excellent work that the mapping group did, I thought to myself, gee, how does the FCC and NTIA catalog exactly how much of this largely ISM band spectrum, how do they catalog that so that we know how much of it is being used, where and how effectively, and what that impact would be on allocating new spectrum. So it's not something that we've worked on in this task force, but I think it's something that in general is going to be needed in order to facilitate Internet of Things devices.
And Andy, I was going to follow. I think we're on the same page there, because I was wondering if maybe the mapping recommendation captures some of that, or is is on the cusp of that notion possible.
Joe, do you want to
It's an
respond?
interesting idea. Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I think it is. I've seen some academic research on using software-defined radios to map out utilization of all sorts of different spectrum. And of course, I believe it was Joy's work mentioned all the people who are talking about spectrum sharing and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, that is not part of the national broadband map today. We've really been focused on the near-term blocking and tackling of getting internet to rural areas, and I think the point Andy's bringing up is a really important but somewhat longer-term perspective on it. I could definitely see it being ripe for academic research. I mean, we could include a recommendation now. I'll take that back to the group for discussion. I don't think it belongs in the national broadband map, which the national broadband map is really about mass market availability of where can a consumer today go to get something. And when you start talking about spectrum, you're going a little further upstream from that. But it's really close to the point we were making about TV white space. You could say, well, it's not just TV white space, it's all sorts of things. TV white space is one particular example. So yeah, there's a lot of food for thought there. Thanks.
Joy?
I just want to chime in that basically there are so many unknowns, and what we want to do is bring light to those unknowns. Whether what I am calling the gap, whether there's no fiber or dark fiber, we need to know. In terms of spectrum, unused or underutilized or not built out, we need to know. So I think, and I don't know if that is that somebody just hasn't gotten there yet, or if it's like a secret for proprietary reasons for different providers. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, other thoughts?
Doctor, this is Dan again.
Yes.
Maybe just a little bit of a thought, and I'm sorry to drag on the same point a little bit here, and I appreciate Joy's revelation number. I'll come back to that. But I think the gap to me is still in the 95% that we don't know. We may know there's fiber there, and we may not. And what we've discovered in Nebraska, and I won't point out any stakeholders necessarily, but there's fiber all over the state and different places because of public power, because of railroads, things like that. But there's a real reluctance to share that data because of several reasons. Is how was it paid for? Like in the public, if it was put in 25 years ago and we still are dark fiber, and it was put in there for the power or the railroad industry to use, they're not going to want to share the fact that they charged their electric customers to put in that fiber 25 years ago. And now it's a huge revelation is that, well, that ought to be the electric customers' fiber. That's the political side that I have seen. I just wanted to share that with you, why that there is a gap in that 95%. And I think it's going to be a struggle to pull the use of that fiber out of that. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I appreciate the comment. I think that's helpful. I would say, go ahead, Joy.
Well, I look forward to hearing what you think about that. My concern is, okay, but I mean, yes, there's a lot of political issues here, and that translates into policy, but we do need to get to the bottom of it. So, what is it that we need to do to get to the bottom of it?
Very good. Other thoughts? Heather, you're back. Oh, Andy, go ahead, Andy, quick.
I'll try for quick. So we're seeing a lot of concern right now about equipment that we're using on farms that's made offshore, and you can insert country of choice in that comment. And I'm wondering whether we've adequately addressed those concerns in our discussions about security. We've covered security quite a bit in the past, and we briefly touched on it today, and I wondered whether any of the newest concerns, and primarily about drones right now, are worthy of any more digging by the task force.
I guess I'll give you my thought on it, Andy. It's not a charge, although previous task force have discussed it, and it certainly could be added as a thought from the task force. I'm going to slide this into okay, we're going to have a general discussion now. The task force could say, we think it's worthy of further talk, discussion, investigation, moving forward. So, Andy, it could be handled in that fashion if the task force would like to include it moving forward. Thoughts from the task force members?
I agree. I just don't know where it comes from. You know, who has the expertise for it.
Well, we could write it as a general. The task force thinks that there is a line of inquiry that needs to happen related to security and equipment being assembled, built outside of the United States. And what are the implications of those of that equipment being built there? Think about it. Have the task force members, and we'll put it as an item to bring up again in October, if we want to pursue that line and you know, mention it as we go forward. Right. So with that said, Heather, you had so kindly put together a bunch of items for the open discussion. So would you like to mention them now to the task force? And let's just step through one at a time, if you would. I did put them in the chat, so you can refer there, but go ahead.
Okay, well, it seems that these are just some ideas that may not fall within a specific working group, but number one. Number two, I also am honored to be a task force member, not just a working group leader, and think it's important that we have an opportunity to voice broader recommendations that may not fall into those working groups, but are still very relevant to the charge. So that's the background, okay? And one issue we had discussed in August and followed up on in some exchange was recommending the commission, the FCC, reach out to states about using BEAD funds and other state-guided federal funds to support precision agriculture. or if that's through NTIA, whatever, somehow take these recommendations that we have already made in previous reports and put them into action. And that's one that's right now. And I don't want to get hung up on that one because I think we've got the others are more kind of, how do we continue the work? Because our understanding is this task force concludes December of 2024. So how do we continue to keep the importance of precision agriculture and rural areas in general, maybe not top of mind, but at least toward the front of mind for the FCC and other agencies? And that's where I had some other recommendations. So one was advising FCC to request a communications market report to determine rural coverage and
Hey,
broadband
Heather,
availability.
Can I interrupt just because I don't want to lose track of this. So as far as the task force goes, on Heather's first comment related to the task force providing a recommendation related to the FCC speaking to the states about BEAD funds and how that could be a possibility to support precision ag. Just thoughts on that.
I think if that's not in our report, it ought to be. This is Dan, excuse me.
Okay. All right. Joy, Joe, thoughts? Thanks, Heather.
Okay, yeah, I thought that might help. So this is the one we're talking about. Joy had made a statement to that effect in her report.
Yeah.
I don't know if she lost connectivity again or not. I'm not able to see that.
The BEAD program is administered by NTIA. So are we asking the commission to advocate for this to NTIA? It's not directly within the commission's control is my point.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I kind of did a parenthetical to that effect. But yes, I'll advocate, but draw attention to this recommendation to say, hey, this is timely and relevant. And by the time we get our final report done this round, it may be too late. So who knows?
Well, it's important. I think I missed that phrase there, and other state-guided federal funds. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Heather, this is Dan again.
Yeah. Yeah, Dan.
Hey, one thing I will remind the group even the BEAD funding is very specific in the NOFO and different pieces of that puzzle. In the state of Nebraska, the legislature had a bill statute inside of our Bridge Act, which is a universal telecom promoting state funds for telecom. Anyway, directing BEAD funds be used for precision ag of the amount of $2 million. And we had to remind them that the BEAD language would not allow that to be done at that point in time. So it is really the BEAD funding is extremely complicated.
Now, it's my understanding now that there's opportunity in the discretionary funds portion that states could apply that. So I don't know. I'm not informed or intelligent enough, or to know if that was part of the evolution of the program or if that's related to some recent guidance that was issued.
I just say that on the fact that I would be supportive of it even if it's not in statute. Let's change the statute. That's what I would say. Thanks.
Yes, this just makes sense. Come on. Yeah. Michael, can we move on to the next point? Or were
Yes.
you wanting some more? Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So within, and I'm not an expert on FCC's processes and procedures, but this notion of a communications market report, that's how they can, get serious and make carriers be serious about reporting to them and getting information to really determine what rural coverage and broadband availability is across all three areas. Because I think what may have happened in the past is it didn't include satellite, and it may have just come out of the wireline division, or wireless may have done something separate. So what we're asking here is, okay, let's look at all our, the three major sources that we would receive internet from, and do it in one market report so everything's captured. That's the essence of this, is to kind of formalize. Then, Joe, you had mentioned, which, by the way, I totally trust your interpretation of the Broadband Data Act, because I don't know that chapter and verse, but make a recommendation it be amended to include mapping voice services. Because I can't remember who it was, it may have been you, Joe, who said the killer app for agriculture is still the telephone call. It's the voice call, because that's how stuff gets done when you're out in the field.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, please. Was that you? Or was it somebody else?
It probably was. Yeah, I believe that's true, that the voice call is still the killer app, especially to agriculture, and especially because people can still, most parts of the country can still have a voice call while they're behind the wheel of a car or other heavy machine. And yeah, the Broadband Data Act, so that was not my recommendation, but I think I'd be supportive of it. The Broadband Data Act does not include voice calls in it. It is strictly broadband, and it defines broadband as minimum of 1 megabit per second upload. And so for people who aren't familiar with it, voice calls take something on the order of 8 to 16 kilobits per second, so a lot less. So coverage for voice and text messages is a lot better. Yeah, I don't know that we need to modify the Broadband Data Act, but we might include the National Broadband Map. Because I mean, the biggest thing about the Broadband Data Act was telling the FCC to build a national broadband map. So,
and maybe, yeah, I wouldn't want people to get hung up on well, there's voice and then there's data, and kind of get hung up on definitions rather than the purpose. So maybe it's just the larger point of mapping voice services.
Well, but I think you're highlighting the point that there's an awful lot of confusion today, and I can't help but think some of it's intentional. People talk about direct-to-device connectivity, and many people believe that that's going to be the same broadband kind of experience you get in your home with Wi-Fi, and I don't think that's what we're going to get initially. We're going to get text messages in remote places, and I don't even think they're going to be multimedia text messages. I think trying to send a photograph is going to not go through a lot of the time. Now, I could be mistaken, because it hasn't been widely deployed. But then there are other kind of services, like, for example, the AST Space mobile service, that will be more like a broadband kind of experience. So there's this giant spectrum, and we're not always really clear about which element on the spectrum we're talking about. But your recommendation, if you wanted, I'm not wild about changing the Broadband Data Act because that literally requires an act of Congress. But modifying the map, the FCC has actually quite a bit of latitude to modify the map.
So Heather, may I recommend amending such that maybe the mapping working group look at this and see if that works for them to include in their recommendations, that it not be a overall task force, but it comes from the working group. Does that seem reasonable to you?
I think so. I just think so that we would highlight the point that really my larger point is the voice services aren't even here yet, and yet we're expecting 100 by 100 at the last acre. And
Okay.
The point being, we are so far behind. It's embarrassing, and beyond that, beyond frustrating, it's damaging to business. It's damaging to relationships, and that's the larger point. So how do we fix it? So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, Joe, you pick up the torch on that one?
Yeah, I'll take it back to the mapping working group.
Okay.
We're getting
Right,
a lot
next.
of action items here.
You're where the action is, really. So publishing task force reports for public review and comment. I think right now they may be posted as, oh, here's a report, but it's not actually seeking comment and feedback back. So this is another way to keep the ball moving forward, keep some momentum so it doesn't just stop with us. Just a recommendation there. Don't know if we need to discuss that one or not. But.
Well, yeah, I'd certainly like to hear the task force members' thoughts on that one. Andy.
Yeah, I think that this is a worthy comment. And there are task force members that have been on along with me the last few years. And I think in previous terms, we actually did publish interim reports that could be examined. And we've not done this term. And so we have done, and hats off to the working group chairs. The last few meetings have done a great job of summarizing the points that their working groups are making. But this particular term, we've not allowed anyone to see the interim reports. And so that was in the past a way for people to see what the task force was working on with more granularity.
And if my understanding is maybe nuanced, but we would actually encourage the commission to then seek review, not just put it out there and say, here's the report, but we invite feedback and comments. The idea being then Congress or someone can say, and now we need to take some of this feedback and do the next 5 steps, whatever those become.
I'll add just a little more color on this. In the previous 2 terms, and I don't think we actually touched on it this term because we touched the stove and we knew that we would get burned. We run into problems with FACA, where we've wanted to hear from more experts, and it's always been deemed to be too difficult to gather information from multiple people. So to the extent that we can, and subsequent task forces or subsequent activities that involve precision agriculture, if we can get feedback from additional people, additional experts, it's always valuable. So I totally support what Heather said here.
Well, and so the next 2 points flow that Andy and I really didn't talk ahead of this. Okay, everybody, don't. But the next one was the commission continue to work with U.S. Department of Agriculture and other agencies like NTIA who are involved with oversight and measurement and delivery of internet connectivity to rural and ag areas. But the beauty of working with USDA and all its sub-agencies would mean that this ongoing survey, then the last point of precision agriculture, like industry providers, equipment manufacturers, farmers, and mapping efforts, but the industry, the value chain piece of that, that could be done through ERS, Economic Research Service, and or National Ag Statistics Service, in conjunction with the Ag Research Service. But there are people very experienced at developing survey instruments with access to data sets that could then engage in this, and that moves us out of the FACA discussion, the purgatory of, okay, well, I guess we're not going anywhere with that idea. I think by allowing the commission and directing the commission, and again, Congress may have to do this, but the recommendation being, commission, continue to work with USDA and explore each other's resources to solve problems. And here's what one of the ongoing work products should be. And that is, anticipating the next level of connectivity of what we need, of data needs. So that's, yep, Michael, those are my recommendations, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Other thoughts, questions of Heather? I'm not seeing hands. Heather, I guess I'm going to take my turn to make a comment. Publishing task force reports, they are doing that, and they're not seeking public review, but I don't know if that's common practice for them to do it. And I'm not sure January 1st, 2025, we're done. Our report will be in before then, so I'm not seeing the ongoingness. Certainly with the next one, direct the commission or ask the commission to continue to work with USDA. I think that's a beautiful one, and I see the continuity in that going forward, and that works for me. On the last one, because I chaired the past two mapping working groups, or one, Shrikala did the other one. We had that language written into our part of the report, and certainly we could work with Joe to revise it to plug that in there.
Yeah, I wondered if we needed to, somehow elevate some of these things from an ongoing nature. I mean, just having been on the giving and the receiving end of taking somebody else's work product and then doing something with it. So I just wonder, if we need to think how we structure our final report, if there are some things where we want to just really pull them out and say, to keep progress going, there need to be some procedural kind of institutional steps in place.
100% agree.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, this last bullet point looks very much like one of our sustainability bullet points from the mapping working group. And we can look at the way that was phrased and the way this is phrased. This looks like a little bit broader, but it's really closely aligned with what we were suggesting.
Well, thanks for letting me share them. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen now. Okay.
So I'm going to ask the task force members. What I'm thinking is, I think Heather has given us some really good food for thought. I think a couple of the working groups can take a look at these, that it be there, and I really do like the idea of elevating. I think that's important. We need to see this to keep going. But what I would like to do is have the task force members think about this a little bit deeper, and then on our October meeting, we'll bring it back to discussion. Is that acceptable? One, Heather, is that acceptable to you?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I'm sorry, I was typing. I hadn't muted myself. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. But just wondering what the other task force members, because even in our October meeting, we'll still have time, especially if we're going to elevate it in the final report. Thoughts from task force members? Or give me a thumbs up if you think that's a good approach.
I think it's an excellent approach.
Okay.
I would agree. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Heather, good.
Yes,
Andy, what about you?
I'm all about giving work to the next people that work on this topic. So.
Thanks, Andy.
Well, in theory, there isn't, right? In theory, this is the final term. And to me, what's important about that is that what we really want to do is get something done.
Right.
Absolutely.
But it really has been a pleasure to meet like the FCC staff. And I think there are several people who are like, you know, this is really interesting. We weren't aware of this, and we do have some resources here, but yet everything is so prescribed in terms of what they can do that I think we need to help think creatively and assign things to say, and this is the work you can continue to do. It help create the prescription for solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Other comments, thoughts, discussion?
Would you mind working through our timelines again, Mike? I know I've got them in writing. I've shared them with our working group, but like what you expect from us in terms of report, timing.
I will do that.
Okay.
I'm going to give Emily a chance. Emily, do you want to say a few words and then I'll?
Yep. So I just really want to thank all of you for sharing your recommendations. The discussion they fostered, I thought, was really interesting and engaging, and it was really heartening to see the amount of progress you guys have made thus far this term. And I just know that took so much time and so much work. And I just want to thank all the working group members and task force members for putting that in. And I know we're in great shape as we move forward the rest of the term. So Mike and I will reach out more with expectations between what goes to the FCC and what goes to the rest of the task force leadership. But just to reiterate what you've heard, our next meeting will be October 15th, similar to this, fully virtual. Again, we'll hear updates from the groups on recommendations and discuss the executive summary. And then I know you guys have heard this date before, but the last full meeting will be December 5th. We're going to vote on the task force comprehensive report as required under Farm Bill. And then to make sure that the report is ready for voting, the FCC will need that report, 30 days to read the report, and then to get it back to you as the task force members for your review prior to that meeting. And I just want to say it really is a privilege to serve as the DFO of this task force and just to work with you and meet all of you. It's been great. And I also want to thank my deputy DFO, Tom Hastings, as well as my FCC and US state liaisons for all of your really excellent work and support you've provided. And I also want to thank the commission staff for their support in planning and running this meeting. They've been really flexible and just invaluable. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Emily. So you know the next date of our next meeting. I would ask of you that by that next meeting you have your thoughts in recommendation form, please, because I'm going to be looking at them, and I'm working on the executive summary. So as much as you can give me any kind of information, I appreciate it. I would ask that if you, like Joy has a beginning of a summary paragraph, if you have a draft, just shoot it to me. I can use it as a placeholder as I begin getting my thoughts together. And really what it is to help me visualize what Heather talked about, is elevating certain elements to the task force level and making suggestions for the future. So having that would be extremely important.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Michael, when you say in recommendation form, what does that mean?
So Joy, it's just that we recommend, and you could start with that and then bullet underneath that if you choose, or you can, the recommendation is for each one, but so that when the commission looks at it, it knows, what is this a suggestion? Is this a thought? Is this, no, it's quite easy to say it's a recommendation from the task force. Because remember, the working groups create drafts and the task force votes on it as it goes forward. These are the recommendations going forward. Does that make sense, Joy?
Well, I'm trying to understand if it's, bullet points or if you're looking for a draft of the report.
Not a draft. I'm just looking for bullet points.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay. Not seeing any. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mike, I think you're free to adjourn if everyone's
okay.
ready.
Well, then I'm gonna, since it's free, I'm going to adjourn. Thanks, everyone. It's been great. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.